Okay, in these group of videos, I have no idea how many it's going to be. If I was to guess, maybe 5, possibly more. And we're going to talk about, it's kind of like a combination topic where it's estate planning and it's the process, of course, the importance of making a will. This first little bit of information here is going to give you a little bit of insight into what I'm getting at. The idea of doing your estate planning is one thing, but then you need to put pen to paper because the palest ink is better than the best memory, and you want to put your thoughts of how you would like your estate to be dealt with by putting it down on paper. Then there's a much greater chance that those wishes are going to be met. It's not as easy as it seems, because just because you want something, other people may not want what you want, and then the legal process gets to work. And I'll tell you a quick little story about a student went through my mutual fund course years ago and had second, her first marriage was her husband's second marriage, and when her husband was sick and dying, the week before, the son from the first marriage came in and got the father to sign a whole bunch of papers. She had 3 lawyers in her estate that were fighting to try to resolve all these problems, and she had paid $15,000 in legal fees, and she still had no resolution. So I told her that it would appear that the best solution was that her husband would have to come back and do his plan all over again. Obviously, you can't do that. So the first thing is determine what are your objectives. You work hard, you've accumulated a bunch of capital, and now you're trying to figure out how you're going to distribute it, who's going to get it, are there going to be conditions attached. The problem with assets is you may have property, you may have cash, you may have stock, you may have business interest, you may have shares in Canadian-controlled private corporation. There's a lot of issues involved, and you may want to give a cottage to, say, one child because they go there all the time, but what if the cottage turns out to be more valuable than the residential house? And then you've got issues. What if you and your son, and let's say you have a father and 2 kids as an example, what if you die together? What's your backup plan? Because now you have to figure out who's next in line. So I mean, these are this is probably going to be the most interesting thing about this, is that it's going to open up your eyes, that you really have to think carefully. Unfortunately, people spend more time planning a vacation than they do their estate plan. The big problem is, if you're planning your estate, you have admitted that you are mortal and your time on this planet is limited, and a lot of people are very much loath to even think about that topic. So that's the first. You've got your objectives, the bigger picture, what you're trying to do. Then you have to collect all the data and analyze it to figure out, okay, da-da-da-da-da. For example, I leave my house to Joe, whoever Joe is. Well, does that include anything that's on the property? What if there's a $100,000 motorhome on the property? What about cars? What about jewelry? What about safety? Then third item is choose a strategy. For example, let's say a parent has a child and the child happens to be 12 or 14 years old. You don't want that child to, even if the child was 18, you don't want to give that child access to everything, because, you know, easy come, easy go. Generally speaking, second generation wealth tends to evaporate because of mismanagement, lack of training, maybe just not used to being in control of a large amount of money. I mean, these things happen. So what you might want to do is have some kind of trust fund, whether you set it up before or whether you set it up after by way of your will. But we'll get into that topic later. The logic of a trust makes a lot of sense. Let's assume a testamentary trust, where in U.S. I'm not sure about, but this is in reference to Canada, even though a lot of the information is still kind of valid across the board. Quebec and Canada obviously being different. The assets will go from a will to, through the will, you would therefore have a trust set up, and maybe it might be managed, say, by a trust company, say Canada Trust, and then the child would receive income. now things get more complicated. What are you going to invest the money in? Let's assume it was $300,000 as an example. Are you able to put some of that money into stocks? If they do and the stock market crashes, who's responsible? So this is where things really get a little bit complicated, and I can promise you, when things go wrong, victims look for someone to blame. Even if they look in the mirror, they can't see themselves because they can't blame themselves. They have to blame somebody else for their trouble. This is human nature. So once you've decided on your strategy of how you're going to go about doing things, then you'll implement your plan, and you're going to need an executor to do this. And let me just give you a simple example where you've chosen an executor. And we're going to get into that in more detail. That's probably just one video by itself. Does the executor want the job? Are they younger than you? Because if you're, say, 70 and you choose an executor who's 75, well, hello, they may go before you. So what's your backup plan? Where are your documents? Does the executor have a copy? If they do, they now know about all your personal information before you have even left. So again, another issue to think about. Some parents may decide that, let me just transfer the assets to my kids while I'm alive now, and then it's done, they have it. But maybe they're never going to visit you after. Or maybe they're going to waste it, and then you're really going to be in a lot of pain, and you probably wish you would pass away sooner. So whatever you do, there is pro and con, and that's really what I'm trying to get across here. When it gets down to the point where you're going to do a will, go and see a lawyer and make sure it's done properly and get advice. The advice I would give you is do not go in to see a lawyer if you have not done your work. Because at $250 an hour, I mean, you could spend a couple $1,000s getting a will done if it's a little bit complicated and you have done no due diligence. And, well, I know this, I know that, but I don't know where that is. I'll have to find it. And then, you know, the lawyer will be quite happy to sit and talk to you all day long because you're paying for it. So better to get a friend, go to the coffee shop if you want someone to talk to. So once you've implemented your plan, then you have to monitor the plan. And let me just give you one other little hint here how these two kind of relate together. You've implemented the plan, and let's assume that you're passed away, your executor is looking after things, he becomes sick, he becomes disabled. Who is then going to be in control? Who's your backup? So okay, now you have a backup. So the second person would take over. Let's assume the executor died. But the person that takes over in the second basis, turns out they live 500 miles away, and you know, that's a big headache, and there's so many things that are difficult to do, and you start to get a sense of just how complicated the whole process can be. When you look at the demographics, that it's estimated within 15 years, 1 out of every 4 people will be virtually 65 years old in this country. You can see the need for estate planning, and they have in Canada what's called the $1 trillion trickle down, where there is just a humongous amount of money that has built up. By the way, this bear market that we're in, if you happen to be in the wrong sector, because I think the real estate market's in for an epic decline in Canada. Can't predict when it's going to happen, but I mean, this mess going on in the U.S., no way it's going to be avoided here, because everything in Canada is a little bit out of control also. So a lot of that wealth is not going to be there that people thought was going to be there. Stock markets are in a long-term decline. The U.S., the economy, the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, they're in for a massacre. And they have to fulfill their destiny of a bubble bursting, and they go through massive long-term declines. So a lot of that wealth is not going to be there. You know what's happening in the real estate in the U.S. That's kind of ipso facto. We don't have to talk about that. The reality is it's not over with. I think this is going to go on for a very long time, even though you're going to have little recoveries, so that wealth isn't going to be there. So maybe in the end there's not going to be all the wealth that everyone thinks there is. We'll just have to wait and see. But that's how implementing your plan, you need to have some kind of a backup plan, and we'll talk about some of those issues. One of the more obvious ones are kids. Who's going to look after them? What are the implications? What if the kids don't want to be there? And on and on. But really what I'm trying to do here is open up your eyes to some of the complexities, to try to keep it a little bit funny, a little bit simple, and at least that way you'll have a little bit of a working knowledge base.